Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fred Nauer. I'm the Chief Flight Instructor, Assistant Chief Flight Instructor for Thunderbird Aviation. I'd like to welcome you all to, excuse me, welcome you all to the monthly safety seminar that we have here at Thunderbird. This one's going to be about airspace and the ways depicted on the sectional chart and how we can and use some scenarios to try to explain all the different types of airspace that we can find on the sectional chart itself. Need to put myself over this direction so I can keep an eye on what's going on up here, so I can keep admitting people as the meeting continues here. So you may see me look up periodically to make sure that I'm not missing anybody. So let me start sharing the contents of my iPad here, which I've connected to my ForeFlight. And we'll look at all the information we have available to us on the sectional as far as airspace and stuff is concerned. So what I'm basically going to be using here, if you're those of you who are trying to follow along with your iPads, so I'm going to just be using the sectional section. Let me get rid of some of this extra stuff here that we don't need right now. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the basic airspace, the A, B, C, D, E, G stuff, or as far as the sectional is concerned, only the stuff that is depicted on the sectional chart itself. So let's start here at Crystal Airport, which is now right in the middle of your screen there. And let me create a little flight plan that we're going from Crystal up to International Falls. ForeFlight then draws the not up there and down here. Then draws a magenta line straight between Crystal and International Falls, and allows us to be able to talk about some of the stuff. I use this same scenario when I'm doing a commercial or private pilot end of course here at Thunderbird Aviation, and it's part of our Part 141 school, or some of the Part 61 folks who come through us, they'll get the same sort of questions. So the scenario I usually come up with, not something that normally people would fly with as just VFR pilots, would be, can you fly this whole route from Crystal to International Falls if there was only 2 miles visibility? There's not a cloud in the sky, but through fires or smoke or something blowing across from the West Coast, the whole state has just been brought down to 2 miles visibility. So the first question then is, can we leave Crystal Airport if we only have 2 miles visibility? The answer is, we move down here to Minneapolis. In Minneapolis, that line on top of the name there is telling us no SVFR. The SVFR stands for Special VFR, and if you can't get a Special VFR clearance out of that airport, then they will make sure that they label that on top of the name of the airport. So when we move back to Crystal, it doesn't say no SVFR above the Crystal Airport name there. So we can get that. Special VFR allows you to fly into Class D airspace, which is normally 3 miles visibility, 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 horizontal. But the Special VFR clearance allows you to fly in it as if it was Class G airspace, 1 mile clear clouds in the daytime. So in order to get that Special VFR clearance, you have to talk to the people who control the airspace, which is obviously the air traffic control folks at Crystal Airport. Class D airspace is a nice blue circle, letting us know that Crystal is a controlled airport, at least part of the time. So You have to talk to the tower, because if they really were letting you fly around 1 mile clear of clouds, if there was IFR traffic coming out of the clouds and you were just clear of the cloud, that could be bad for both of you. So the first thing that has to happen is Crystal Airport has to make sure there's all the IFR traffic has either gotten into the airspace and landed, or taken off from the airport and gotten outside the airspace before they'll give you the special VFR clearance. Once you've received that special VFR clearance, you'll be able to fly just as far as the magenta line goes to the very edge of the blue dashed circle there around the airport. That's the only airspace that they have control over, and so that's where your special VFR clearance ends. So then the next question is, if we're up here by the Gopher VOR, can we continue with just 2 miles visibility? Now we're going to have to probably move away from the from all the regulations that we could possibly be talking about here, and probably ignore the ones that talk about flying over a congested area, because some of the altitudes I'll be talking about may be too low to fly in if we were flying over the Twin Cities area, like right here by Gopher. But just from an airspace standpoint, stand by while I let some more people in here. From an airspace standpoint, is there any airspace out here by Gopher that we could continue to fly in if we had 2 miles visibility, since our special VFR clearance disappeared after we left the Class D airspace? So then we have to start looking at this magenta shading that is just north of Gopher there. I move my iPad out and get a bigger picture of the map. We notice that that magenta shading goes all the way around the Twin Cities and is around various airports nearby. That's a reminder to tell us that from where the shading starts dark and goes light in that direction towards Gopher, the boundary between E and G, the controlled and uncontrolled airspace, is down to 700 feet. So Class G airspace goes up to 700 feet, and then it's Class E above that. So if we want to stay in, especially only in the daytime, if we want to continue on this flight in the daytime with our 2 miles visibility, we're going to have to get down into Class G airspace. So the next question I usually ask is, what altitude can you fly in your altimeter to be legal with 2 miles visibility? Well, for right now, let's assume that Gopher is the same altitude as Crystal Airport. Crystal Airport there, the first number on the bottom line is 869. So Bob has a question about whether it's AGL or MSL. The 700 feet that we're talking about is AGL. So we have to figure out what is 700 feet AGL on our altimeter, so we can figure out what MSL altitude to fly to be 700 feet AGL. So if Gopher is the same altitude as Crystal, and Crystal is 869, then we have to add 700 and 869 and come up with 1569 or something slightly less than that to be able to fly in to be legal with our 2 miles visibility. Again, that'd probably be too low for the congested area and that kind of rule, but it is okay for our scenario right here. We're just you can just use this for just as an airspace situation. So now as we continue north, we notice that we leave the magenta shaded area and go out where the dark part is. Obviously, that means that the boundary between E and G airspace, AGL, changes again. If you're outside that, the boundary between E and G moves up to 1,200 feet AGL. So let me expand this out a little bit so we can get it bigger on your screens there. So let's assume that the lake that we're going to fly right over the top of there is the same altitude as the ground at the bottom of this tower over here on the right side of the screen. So then we got to remember what the symbol means as far as that is concerned. Then the big number on the top is the MSL altitude of the top. The number in the parentheses is the AGL altitude of the top. So to figure out what the MSL of the bottom is, we've got to do some subtraction. And this is usually the part where I tell all my students, yes, there is mathematics in aviation. So we take 1220 minus 320. This one's fairly easy, which is why I picked this one, because it's easy for my non-mathematical mind. basically it's 1200 minus 300, which is 900 feet. So for this exercise, let's assume that the lake is 900 feet MSL, and we need to fly 1200 feet AGL above that. So then we have to add 900 and 1200. We can go up to slightly less than 2100 feet MSL on our altimeter and still be legal with our 2 miles visibility. And as we continue northward here on our line, when we get here near Cambridge, we'd have to go back down to below 700 feet AGL. We already did that math. And then we'd have to go back up to 1200 feet once we leave the 1200 feet AGL, once we leave the that shaded area around Cambridge. And then we keep going. There's some more towers. We've already talked about that part. Back down below 700 feet when we fly past Mora, back up. Then keep going north here. There it is. Now, right in the middle of your screen is a dot with a number next to it. Whoops, not watching my admitting duties here, sorry. So if you're flying in an area where you see this dot with a number next to it, unlike the towers, where you have to do some subtraction to figure out what the ground is, the black dot at the surface is telling, and the number next to it is telling you exactly what the altitude is at the ground at that spot. It's basically the highest point in the area. Here in Minnesota, they're few and far between because we're a fairly flat state. But we're also, I've noticed in doing all this stuff over the years, Minneapolis and St. Paul is like in the bottom of the bowl. Everything around us into Wisconsin and in Minnesota, all the altitudes around us, as far as the ground is concerned, seem to get higher. So we know then if we're flying over this area, the ground is probably very close to being 1,430 feet MSL. So we're outside the magenta shading again. So now we have to figure out, what is 1,200 feet AGL as far as in MSL, if we're going to fly this on our altimeter. So now we're going to add the 12 and the 14 to come up with 2,400 feet. So we could fly at 2,400 feet over this spot. And we'd have to keep doing that all the way along. Go down below for the 700 foot and up above, and keep looking at the towers nearby to figure out what the ground's doing, to figure out what altitude we need to fly in order to be able to stay at 1,200 feet AGL. So we'd be going down and up and up and down. So, another reason why I probably wouldn't be flying with 2 miles visibility without being on an IFR clearance. So then the next question I normally ask during my check rides is, now we're up to International Falls. Can we land at International Falls with 2 miles visibility? So then we have to look at the symbol around International Falls and look at that as the dashed line all the way around the airport there, telling us that the magenta dash line, is telling us that there's Class E that starts at the surface. So at initial blush here, we have to do, it says, Class E to the surface means that the weather there must be at least 3 miles visibility. And to fly into the airspace, we need to be 1,000 feet above, 500 below, and 2,000 horizontal. To land at the surface area of B, C, D, and E that comes down to the surface like this, for landing there, we need a 1,000-foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility. So the visibility needs to stay at 3 miles no matter what part of the airspace we're flying in. So if we have 2 miles visibility, it looks at first blush here that we can't land at International Falls. Now, in my mind, I think there's always a possibility that you could probably ask for, probably ask for a special Vfr clearance. We'll talk about that in a second. So I've had another good question. If it's Class E airspace down to the surface, like it is here at International Falls, is that there all the time? And the answer to that question is yes. The only one that may change was way back at, I can pop back there right now. Way back here at Crystal, you notice that there's a star next to the frequency for the control tower. That means the control tower is part-time, meaning when the control tower closes, this changes to a different type of airspace. Now, basically, you you have to officially look in the chart supplement book, which is now what they call the airport facilities directory. Look in the chart supplement book to see if it changes from D to G or D to E. Most of the time it's going to change from D to E. But the Class E airspace, like is depicted in International Falls, will always be in effect 24 hours a day. So now if we want to figure out if there's a frequency we could use to fly into to talk to somebody in International Falls, you know, all of everybody's pictures kind of in the way here, but over on the side, you see the Minneapolis Center one. That's 120.9. You can always try that because Minneapolis Center is the one that's controlling all the IFR traffic. So they're the only ones that could be able to give you a special VFR clearance in International Falls, even if they're, you know, even if they're allowed to do that. Most of the time, though, you probably have to just pick one of the airports nearby, hopefully one that you can find a rental car at, and then just drive up to International Falls. So this is a way I ask questions about basic airspace and chart symbols and that type of thing. That isn't just what's this, what kind of airspace is that, what kind of weather minimums do you need? The student has to think about it while they're not getting audio from Charles. Check your volume. Everybody else is getting audio, right? Carl, can you hear me? I can see your picture.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Check your volume. Check and make sure that the I think most, you know, just like your radio, check the volume first to see if that helps. I mean, better go tell him that.
You're loud and clear, Fred.
Okay. So like I tell the students, I don't expect them to ever fly anywhere VFR with 2 miles visibility. It's just an exercise to use so we don't have to just go, what kind of airspace is this? And what kind of weather minimums are there? Then the next question I ask on the check ride is, what kind of airspace is this? I have to go all the way to Green Bay to find this because there's none of this in Minnesota. Green Bay is the closest Class C airspace, maybe Des Moines, Iowa, but it's closest Class C airspace to Minneapolis. So now we have, so the thick lines that look exactly the same thickness as the Class B airspace, but they're magenta, and there's only 2 of them. That lets us know that we're in Class C airspace. So then we have to figure out what all these numbers and everything mean, but rather than just ask the question, I go, use my little 4-flight planning tool here. So I'm going to take off from Carter Airport, which is right there at the north end of my line. And I'm going to take off from there. I'm going to fly right along that line and fly right over the town of Seymour there, just west of Green Bay. So that's the line I'm going to fly on. I'm going to take off from there and level off at 1,500 feet AGL. So the question I ask then is, do they have to talk to anybody? So then we have to know that we look over there in that, right along that line between Carter and Seymour. There's a little fraction there. It says 47/19. That's telling us that the top of the Class C airspace is at 4,700 feet MSL. And the bottom of the shelf out to the 10-mile ring here is down, it stops at the bottom of it is at 1,900 feet MSL, which is basically 4,000 feet and 1,200 feet above the ground, above the airport in the middle of the Class C airspace. And let me try that again. The 4,700 feet is 4,000 feet above the airport. The 1,900 feet is 1,200 feet above the ground underneath the outer ring there. So sometimes you'll see pie shapes in there because the ground may go up and down a lot. So if I'm flying between Carter and Seymour and I'm at 1,500 feet MSL, officially I'm not in the Class C airspace, I'm below that outer ring. So the answer is, do I have to talk to anybody? The answer is no, if I'm at that altitude. The next question is, do I need a transponder with mode C? The transponder with mode C requirement in Class C airspace means, it says, first one is, if you're below the airspace, you don't need a transponder with mode C, and I keep forgetting to add nowadays ADS-B out, because that's ADS-B out is also required in every places where the transponder with mode C is also required. So we're down at 1,500 feet AGL, flying between Carter and Seymour. Then we don't need to talk to anybody, and we don't need to have a transponder with mode C. So then I move out a little bit and say, okay, same line basically. I'm going to fly over the Carter Airport and fly over Seymour, but I'm out here by the Sobieski point. Now I'm at 2,500 feet. Do I have to talk to anybody before I cross that outer ring? So then we look at the fraction again, and the line we're flying is between 1,900 feet MSL and 4,700 feet MSL is the Class C airspace. So if I'm at 2,500 feet MSL, then I need to talk to somebody before I cross that line. The question is who? Well, way back last century, when they went from the alphabet soup airspace to the A, B, C, D, E, G stuff, I had to learn that the Class C airspace had a 5 nautical mile radius inner ring, 10 nautical mile radius outer ring, and there was something they called the 20 nautical mile outer area. The only symbol for the outer area was this rectangle. And with the rectangle, the 20 nautical mile outer area was just a place to remind you that you got to talk to somebody before you get into the Class C airspace. So what the rectangle tells us is contact, CTC, contact Green Bay approach, not the Green Bay app, which one of my young students think that's like an app for your phone. Green Bay approach within 20 nautical miles on 119.4. You need to talk to somebody who's got a radar scope in the Class C control area, and they'll be able to let you into the Class C airspace. So the next question is, if you're flying into Class C airspace, what do you have to hear on the radio from the controller on 119.4 in order for them to allow you into the airspace? And the answer is, just like Class D airspace, all you need to do is establish two-way radio communication, which means you have to hear your tail number as you're coming. And if they say your tail number, you're allowed into the airspace. So the example everybody uses is, you're north of Green Bay here, and you call up on 119.4, say 4370 November is 10 miles north, like to transition your airspace at 2,500 feet. They say aircraft to the north, stand by. You can't go in because they didn't say your tail number, and the standby part means don't talk to me, I'm busy. Because they say 4370 November, stand by, you can come into the airspace because they said your tail number, you've established two-way radio communication, but the standby part means don't talk to me, I'm busy, I'll get back to you in a second. So here we are, 2,500 feet over Sobieski, flying towards Carter Airport, cross Seymour at 2,500 feet, and we need to talk to somebody before we cross that outer ring. So the next question is, if we're at 2,500 feet, do we need a transponder with mode C and ADS-B out before we cross that line? And the answer is yes. Class C airspace is required. You're required to have both those when you're inside the airspace. So now, same line. I'm way out here flying over Carter, and I fly over Seymour, but now I'm at 6,500 feet. Do I need to talk to anybody? The answer is no. You're above 4,700 feet. You're above the airspace, so you're not going to be entering the Class C airspace, so you don't need to talk to anybody to establish a two-way communication because you're not entering the airspace. But you need a transponder with mode C. And the answer is yes. just like in Class B airspace, where there's a 30 nautical mile mode C veil that starts at the surface and goes all the way up to 10,000 feet. The reason everybody talks about 10,000 feet is because if you're above 10,000 feet, that's where you need a transponder with mode C and ADS-B out no matter what airspace you're in. So around Class B airspace, there's a 30 nautical mile radius tube that comes all the way down. And if you're inside that tube, you need to have a transponder with mode C and ADS-B out. Class C is almost the same thing. As we already talked about, you don't need it if you're underneath the airspace, but there's a tube that comes out of that 10,000 foot requirement. It's only 10 miles in radius and comes down and rests right on top of the Class C airspace. So if you're in the Class C airspace, or if you're above it, inside that tube, you need a transponder with mode C. So even though you don't have to talk to anybody, if you're at 6,500 feet, you still need a transponder. I think the thing that was happening here for the Class C airspace when they switched over to this was try to accommodate the people who didn't want to spend, and in those days, get the mode C stuff and still allow them to be able to be somewhere close to the airspace without having to talk to anybody. So that's the Class C airspace. So Bob, is the Class C airspace in effect continuously? Again, this would be one of the things that you would look in the chart supplement book to see, although it might not be, because it looks like the control tower with the star next to 118.7 is a part-time tower. So it probably means that when the tower closes, the Class C stuff disappears too. But that would be talked about in the chart supplement book.
Actually, I want you to point out the note just to the northeast of Green Bay, over the bay, where it says in red.
Yes. So the supplement is the chart supplement book. I see. Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that. So now we're going to go all the way to Wilmington, North Carolina. Not that we don't have any of these nearby, but this allows me to start talking about the special use airspace after we get done with this one. So this one is, I always ask the question to my students, what are these gray circles? Or sometimes they're black circles, depending on how much ink they put in the printer when they're printing the sectional chart. This is a holdover from the old alphabet soup airspace. You know, it's just north here, it says Wilmington TRSA. That's the Terminal Radar Service Area. For those of you who are old enough like me to remember way back last century, before we went to the A, B, C, D, E, G stuff, if it was a large, very busy airport, it was a terminal control area, and there was an airport traffic area in the middle of that, near the airport. The next busiest airport was an airport radar service area, and it had an airport traffic area in the middle. Then less busy than that, but still having radar, was a terminal radar service area, and the airport traffic area was in the middle of that. And if it was any airport that had a control tower outside of any of those other three airspaces, it was just an airport traffic area all by itself. So then when the A, B, C, D, E, G stuff came along, the TCA became Class B. The airport radar service area, the ARSA, became Class C, and the airport traffic area in both those airspaces disappeared. It was Class B only to the surface, Class C only to the surface. All the towered airports became Class D airports, and the TRSA didn't match any of the A, B, C, D, E, G airspace definitions. So rather than rip up all the radars and fire all the radar people, we just kept the TRSAs around because they were useful. And I also tell my students, and they put one of these in every section in the country so that so people like me can ask people like you, what are these gray circles? The other thing that happened to the airport traffic area was always 4 miles in radius. The Class D airspace, now we go down here to Wilmington, if I line this up right, is 5 miles. So now the Class D airspace is whatever space it needs to be to to accommodate the traffic. So when the TURSA was in effect back in the days before the ICAO airspace came in, the Class D airspace was inside that, the airport traffic area was inside that gray circle. Now it's not anymore. So, so a TURSA is, like I said, is left over. See your question there, Bob, is left over from the old stuff. So the classes of airspace are still A, B, C, D, E, and G. So until you get into the middle of this one, you're basically in Class E airspace, 1,200 feet and above, and Class G airspace, 1,200 feet and below. The TURSA itself is just designating the for the VFR pilots a possibility of an extra added help to fly into this airport here. The terminal radar service area is not required. You don't have to talk to anybody. If you're flying in the gray circles, you just do the normal Class D stuff. Get with, normally about 10 miles before you get to the airport, call them up and announce your position and tell them your intentions of whether you're going to fly through the airspace or come in for a landing. And I looked in the chart supplement book for this, and they don't have an explanation for if you need to use, if they highly recommend use the TURSA because they can't require it. But I did have a friend who flew in Augusta, Georgia, even though the Masters wasn't happening, and called the airport 10 miles out and basically got scolded for not talking to the TURSA on their way in. So when she got back and we looked in the chart supplement book to see if there was something in there that said, we highly recommend you talk to the TURSA on your way into Augusta Airport, it didn't say anything like that. But so it's probably a good idea, because the reason the TURSA is still there is because they're still busy enough to have feel the need that they're still busy enough that there's enough airplanes there, especially if IFR traffic, that the radar coverage is helpful and necessary. So it's probably a good idea if you're VFR flying anywhere if you're going to be going anywhere near Wilmington Airport, to talk to the TURSA people so they can at least keep you away from the IFR traffic. And if there's time available. If they're too busy with the IFR folks, then it's going to be then they won't talk to you. So the reason I come down here to Wilmington, North Carolina is because for two reasons. When I was in the Air Force, I was at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base flying backseat in the F4. When I got out of the Air Force in 1989, they said, here's $30,000, go do something else with your life, because the F4 was going away. So then I just went over to the east there to Kinston, and the local community college, the Nauer Community College, had a aviation program at the Kinston Airport. So I bought myself a logbook and started taking ground school classes from the community college and learned how to be a pilot. So my initial flying experience is all in this state. So back to the coast. Now we have this magenta area. Now we're getting into the special use airspace. This is called the Hatteras F Moa. The MOA stands for Military Operations Area. You can fly in there, VFR. The main reason the MOA exists is to keep the IFR traffic away from the MOA traffic. So if you're flying IFR and the MOA is active, you will not be allowed into the airspace. But if you're VFR, you don't have to talk to anybody. All you need to do is see and avoid, basically. Watch out for the airplanes. The trick is in the military operations area, it's mostly aviation stuff, planes flying around, usually doing high speed, random maneuvering. Depending on the altitude of the MOA, it may be high, it may be low. This one goes up to 13,000 feet. The lower limit's 3,000 feet. So so you may be able to sneak under this one without having to worry about being in the MOA itself. But So so like I said, the MOA is there to separate IFR traffic from the aircraft operating the military aircraft operating in the MOA. As a VFR pilot, you can fly in there, just be very cognizant of any other airplanes. There was a frequency listed for this place. You could also call up on that frequency, not required, but you can call up on the frequency and talk to the controller to let them know what you're doing, and they can try to keep the MOA aircraft away from your position. Like if you're trying to go into Holly Ridge grass strip there. So moving up the coast. Now there's a blue area right there. And this is a restricted area. Can you fly in there VFR? The answer is maybe. In the restricted area, it's bombs and rockets and missiles and bullets. Stuff flying around so fast that you can't see it and can't get out of the way. The invisible hazards, most of the books call it. So if you're flying in this air, if that's going on, as a VFR pilot, they won't let you in. But if that stuff's not going on and you call the controlling agency and ask permission, then you can go through the restricted airspace. But you have, no matter what, you have to ask for permission to fly through the restricted area. And the reason I come down here is because this is the only way to get to this type of airspace special use airspace down here, the warning area. Can you fly in a warning area VFR? The answer is yes. You have to talk to anybody? No, but it's probably a good idea, because what goes on in a warning area? Well, when I was at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, me and my pilot would get in our F4 and we'd have 1 or 3 other F4s with us. We'd take off to a high altitude and go out here over the ocean and do high speed intercepts. We drop we drop somebody off just south of the Hatteras F Moa, and the rest of it, somebody else would go out here about 20 miles, and we turn around and try to find each other on the radar and do radar intercepts to see if we could get into position of advantage over the other flight. So it could be MOA stuff in the warning area. Could also be restricted area stuff. The Navy could be out here shooting off those big guns. But because we're more than 3 miles off the coast, we're in international waters. They cannot restrict anybody from being there. So if a jet flies by at supersonic speeds, or if one of those shells the size of a Volkswagen goes by your airplane, we warned you, that's as good as we can do. But so the warning area, then you also have to be careful. You fly out too far and get past the air defense identification zone, the ADIZ, then you need to talk to somebody before you come back. But that's pretty far out there. So the next question is, what are these things that look like a zipper on the chart? It's got 1,700 feet MSL on the one near the warning area. Then below that, it's 5,500 feet, 2,700 feet, 1,300 feet. So what is the functional difference between restricted and warning areas? The only difference is where they're located. We can restrict people from going into a restricted area if it's over the United States, because it's our airspace. If it's a warning area, it could be restricted area type things, but it's over international waters and we cannot restrict anybody from flying there. So they just have to be careful. Or again, there's a frequency you could use to talk to people and let them know, and they'll let you know that stuff's going on. So the zipper areas is a area where the boundary between E and G, controlled and uncontrolled airspace, is non-standard. The definition on the sectional chart legend says where it's not 700 feet AGL, but it could be. But basically, this is, instead of being 1,200 feet AGL or 700 feet AGL out over the ocean, for whatever reason, they've moved it up to 1,700 feet and even as high as 1,500 feet in this one spot. And if you see this zipper symbol over the ground someplace, then instead of having to go up and down like we did on our little exercise flying up the International Falls, the boundary between E and G is flat. So if it's over the ground and it says 1,700 feet MSL in it, if you're above 1,700 feet MSL, you're in E. You need E weather minimums. If you're below, you're in G. You need G weather minimums. So now we go back to the coast, move up just a little bit farther past the restricted area. Now it's magenta airspace, magenta boundary again, just like the MOA was, but now it's called an alert area. An alert area is an area of concentrated flight training. This one here happens to belong to Cherry Point Marine Corps Air Station, which is that airport in the middle of it there. And I've flown over that. That's exactly the way the runways are depicted exactly where they are. They're not one continuous runway from one end to the other. It goes to the middle and jinks over and then becomes another runway. Anyway, the reason this is an alert area is because the Cherry Point Marine Corps Air Station is where they teach the Marine pilots how to fly the F-35 jump jet, because they're the only guys brave enough to get in that jet aircraft that takes off straight up in the air. But, and watch your eyes as I move all the way down to Florida here. This alert area down here, near Daytona Beach Airport, it belongs to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. There are so many airplanes that fly out of Embry-Riddle, and this is one of their practice areas. So they have an alert area created for their practice area because there's lots and lots of training aircraft in there doing stalls and falls and steep turns. So if you're just flying along Victor 267 there, you got to keep your eyes open because there's probably a lot of student pilots out there practicing their maneuvers. So an alert area of concentrated flight training. So then one of the things I liked to do when I was flying out in North Carolina was go up the Outer Banks. Because the Outer Banks are so dangerous, they put lots of lighthouses out there so they could, for the earlier part of the 20th century and latter part of the 19th, to try to keep the boats off the rocks. So you fly up the Outer Banks so you could take a look at all the lighthouses along there, but then you had to worry about this blue line with the dots in it. The blue line with the dots in it is a wildlife area. If you look on the sectional chart, it's usually in one of the back pages, and you can see the symbol there, but it's a straight line with a line of straight dots on it, so sometimes it's hard to recognize. There's a whole paragraph there that talks about everything that symbol represents, but the main thing for us pilots is they request that you stay at least 2,000 feet AGL above that area. It's not a requirement, but they request that you do it. But if you're below 2,000 feet AGL, then you also have to worry about the regulations that say, you know, the minimum safe altitudes, which we were kind of ignoring earlier. If you're below, you know, if you're below 2,000 feet AGL, are you at an altitude where if the engine quits, you're able to get yourself safely on the ground without undue harm to you, your airplane, or the people on the ground? So if I wanted to get low enough to take pictures of the lighthouses, I just stayed out over the water, away from the wildlife area there, and flew up the coast. But a new thing that has happened way out here on the West Coast, I'm going to move all the way across here. It looks almost the same. Hang on a second when I find it. It's usually a lot quicker. There they are. You can go to California. So now we have magenta lines and magenta dots. This belongs to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They regulate what goes on inside this space here. This space is a national marine sanctuary. If you are caught below 1,000 feet AGL in this area, you're basically guilty until proven innocent. The NOAA folks will fine you, I've heard, up to $100,000 if you fly into this airspace, because they assume if you're below 1,000 feet AGL in this airspace, you've bothered the marine life in the marine sanctuary, and thus you're guilty. So don't fly in the purple stuff. Go back across the country here, back to where we were. Okay, so if anybody's read the book, Hunt for Red October, not the movie, just read the book. At one point in the book, they take the Red October and hide it inside the Outer Banks here, and they went right through the Pamlico Inlet here near Ocracoke. That's just trivia. So then we got a restricted area up here again, but this one's got all these gray lines coming into it. What are the gray lines for? The gray lines are military training routes. They allow the military to fly faster than 250 knots below 10,000 feet, because the rule is if you're below 10,000 feet, you have to be below 250 knots unless you're underneath Class B airspace or within 4 nautical miles of the airport in Class C or D airspace. Then you have to go down to 200 knots. Why is it 4 miles around the C and D airports? The only thing I can think of is because it used to be the airport traffic area. But when they expanded the Class C out to 5 miles, or some of the Class D airspace is bigger than 4 miles now. They didn't say the surface area of C and D. I don't know why, but if you're within 4 nautical miles of the airport in C and D airspace, it's down to 200 knots. These gray lines here allow the military to fly faster than that, below 10,000 feet. If there's 3 or less digits in the number, like VR84 there in the middle, then parts of it may go above 1,500 feet AGL, but not by much. If there's more than 3 digits, like VR1074, then the whole thing is below 1,500 feet AGL. So me and my pilot would get in our F4, and we'd have 1 or 3 other F4s out of Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, way west of here. We pick up one of these gray lines just south of the airport and fly it all the way around eastern North Carolina, 500 feet above the ground at 500 knots. It was like Star Wars. It seemed like that to me anyway. So then when we get to the end of the line here, we'd be in the restricted area, and then we go over to the letter A area and drop bombs, because that's where all the targets were. So we do some sort of tactic initially to practice an attack onto a target. Then we basically go into like a traffic pattern and continue to drop bombs or shoot the gun to get all the scores that we needed in order to be able to qualify every 6 months. So then, just an extra thing, if you ever go out to North Carolina, do your best to come to this airport here. Carl certainly has problems today. It's First Flight Airport. It's right next to the Wright Monument and all the displays that are there for the Wright folks. And I always ask the students when I go here, what's this 12 mean? They all know that that the 869 that's in that exact same spot for Crystal Airport is the airport elevation, but when it's a 12 like this, they have no idea. They completely don't think that this airport's only 12 feet MSL. The dash means that this information is missing, because that's usually where, if you go down to Dare County, that's where the light information is. So this airport's unlit, so they put a dash there saying no lights. The 30 is the length of the longest runway in hundreds of feet, and the RP21 is right pattern for runway 21, because where the location of the monument is, if you're coming in to runway 21 from the word Kitty there up there, you got to be in right traffic to stay away from the monument. So now, blue lines with the squares. These are special flight rules area. There's this one here. Let me get this big enough so you can read it. There's this one here. There's 2 over New York City. There's 1 over the Grand Canyon. The other ones in New York and the Grand Canyon are just the places where the Part 91 flight rules have been modified to accommodate what's going on up there. One of them in New York City is, if you want to fly over the Statue of Liberty, got to go down the west side of the Hudson, down the east side of the Hudson River, fly around the statue, come back up the west side of the Hudson River. So everybody's in a nice little racetrack up there, and you're not running into everybody everybody all going over the statue from different directions. There's like 18 to 20 different rules for flying in Grand Canyon. But again, it's just modifying the Part 91 rules. This one here is the only one that can be deadly. So this is a very special one, special flight rules area. So in order to be able to fly into this one, the first thing you got to do is, before you go down there, is go to AOPA, to their Air Safety Institute, and take the class for the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area special flight rules area. What that's going to tell you is, if you're an IFR pilot, file an IFR flight plan, squawk what they tell you, fly where they tell you, and you'll be okay. If you're a VFR pilot, you have to file a VFR flight plan. You got to open that VFR flight plan. When you get close, I skip by it. They give you a big square here saying contact ATC on this frequency. Because you got to get a hold of ATC, they got to give you a discrete squawk code when that belongs to your airplane only before you enter this airspace. Then for VFR guys, you got to enter where there's a gate. So sometimes it's easy to figure out where the gate is because there's a big, huge river underneath it. Sometimes not so much. This grubby gate is kind of nondescript. But then there's another one over here that's I-95 to the BRV gate. And then there's another one up here that is got a railroad track through it. You got to pick the gate that's closest to the airport you want to land at. If you want to go to Manassas Regional Airport, you have to fly through the Fluky gate. You can do traffic banners now. And right after this was created, you couldn't do traffic banners. You just had to basically go in there and do a full stop landing. But now you can do traffic patterns again. But you go in there, do your business, take off, and come right back out the Fluky gate. So unlike the old days, you can't come in the VRV gate, go sightseeing, and then go land in Manassas. Sorry. You got to come in through the Fluky gate. If you get inside, let me let this catch up first. If you get inside the line with the squares, and you're not talking and squawking, then they can send an F-16 or a Black Hawk helicopter out after you. And at this point, all they're trying to do is force you to land at an airport someplace where they have the police waiting for you because they're going to put you in handcuffs and arrest you for not following the rules. This is the only special flight rules area that has this big circle in the middle. Let me let it catch up here. This is a flight restricted zone. To get inside the flight restricted zone, you need a TSA background check. And it is so if you want to learn how to fly at the oldest aviation college in the world, College Park, you got to have a TSA background check. If you want to land at Reagan National Airport, why is this moving so slow now? Which is just south of the mall there. You got to have a TSA background check and special training because you can't land on runway 18 by going straight in because you're going right through the prohibited area that is the Washington Mall. So if anybody who's flown down there or has the approach plates for this area, you notice that Reagan National has a VFR approach plate chart that's called the River Approach. If you're landing on runway 18 or coming into this airport from the north, you fly down the Potomac River there and fly around the prohibited area and then line up and if you're going to landing on 18, then line up and land on the runway. At night, starting at that bridge, it's just to the west of the prohibited area there. There's lights in the river. You follow the lights in the water until you get lined up with the airport and then come in and land. As far as the flight restricted zone is concerned, if you get inside here and you're not talking and squawking and it looks like you're going to threaten something on the ground, the F-16 that you're seeing is not the one you got to worry about. The one you have to worry about is the second one that's been following you this entire time. If it looks like you're threatening something on the ground, the F-16s or the Black Hawk helicopters can get permission to shoot you out of the sky. So because this is the only one where you can get shot at, they make sure that you take a special course in this one, and you have to carry the completion certificate with you. So even AOPA will even has a wallet size one that you can print out at the end of the program to put in your wallet to carry with you if you're flying around in here. So now how I'm doing. Now let's move back over to the west side of the country. When I first started flying here at Thunderbird Aviation this second time around in the 2000s, there was the airspace we're about to talk about. There was one of these in South Dakota. Then it disappeared. Then they found another one in Montana. It disappeared. I found one in California and it disappeared. So I found this one down here. I think it's in Arizona. And this is blue shaded stuff. There's one here. There's one at the Great Bend in Texas, and there's a bunch of them up in Alaska. But if this one disappears, I'm going to quit asking this question. So, first question I ask the students is, what's this blue line, light blue line? That's a Victor Airway. And what kind of airspace is in a Victor Airway? Well, that's echo airspace. So the bottom is 1,200 feet AGL. The top is up to, but not including 18,000 feet. And the airspace is exactly 4 miles either side of center line. So if I take my little measuring device here and put one side inside the blue, right in the middle of the blue line, and bring it right up to the edge of the shading here, the distance from the middle of the Victor Airway to the edge of this blue shading is exactly 4 miles. So for those of you who've been around a long time, you'll recognize this blue shading for back in the days when this magenta shading first showed up. The magenta shading we've already talked about reminds us that from dark to light, inside the shaded part here, the boundary between E and G airspace, controlled and uncontrolled, goes down to 700 feet AGL. When they first started doing this, the blue shading would appear on the outside of this to remind us as pilots that now the blue shading, the airspace now goes back up to 1,200 feet AGL. But there got to be so many of these 700-foot areas that the combination of the magenta and the blue started to cover up a lot of the detail on the chart. So for everywhere except for where I'm about to talk about here, they took the blue shading away. So now the only place the blue shading exists is where it's like this situation right here. So if I move out back and put this all in the middle here, all the way around the outside of this thing is telling us that the Class G airspace goes up to 1,200 feet and it's Class E above that. In the middle here, this representing, for all you guys who read through the regulations, which I know you all do a whole lot, why you need to figure out what are weather minimums in Class G airspace about 1,200 feet AGL when it never goes above that. That's for this place right here. This is the place where the Class G airspace goes all the way up to 14.5. So if I'm at this airport, 14,500 feet, which is the old Continental Control Area. And I'm running out of time, so I can't explain that. So if I'm at this airport, which is now in the middle of your screen, and I'm going to take off from this airport in the daytime, it is Class G airspace all the way up to 14.5. So to take off from this airport, I need 1 mile clear clouds. But if I start in a spiraling climb over the top of this airport, when I get above 1,200 feet AGL, the airspace changes from 1 mile clear clouds to 1 mile, 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 horizontal. If you continue to climb in a spiral, when you go above 10,000 feet, whether you're in E or G, whether it's day or night, the above 10,000 feet, the VFR airspace weather minimums goes to 5 miles visibility, 1,000 above, 1,000 below, 1 mile horizontal away from clouds. Because above 10,000 feet, everywhere else in the world, there's no speed limit. Over the continental United States, it's subsonic because Europe, their supersonic transport worked and they called it the Concorde. Ours didn't work, so we got mad and said, you can't fly supersonic over our country. So they could only fly to New York and Miami and fly around Florida, go to Dallas and come to Los Angeles from the other side. But still, that's like 650 miles an hour is subsonic. That's still really, really fast. So that's why you need more visibility and more cloud clearance. Passing 14.5, we're no longer in G airspace, but we're still in E. So the 5111 still works. And we got up to 17,999 because I can't go any higher than that if I'm in a VFR airplane because that's Class A airspace. And you need to be in an IFR airplane in IFR and an IFR flight plan. So that goes from 18,000 feet up to flight level 600, which is 60,000 feet. But the transition altitude in the United States, where you go from the local altimeter setting to 2992 is 18,000 feet. So all altitudes above that are in flight levels. Above flight level 600 goes back to Class E airspace again. If I get the 17,999, spiral all the way back down and put gas in my airplane, and now it's dark to take off from this airport. If I'm staying, this is an obscure little piece in the regulations because everybody thinks Class G at night is 3152, 3 miles visibility, 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 horizontal. But if you're staying within a half mile of the airport, in Class G airspace during night hours in an airplane, you can fly around with 1 mile clear clouds. So at this airport, if you go more than a half mile away, or most Class G airports, if you go more than a half mile away, you need 3152. If you're staying in the pattern, you can fly around 1 mile clear clouds if you really have to. And in this airport, if you get above 1,200 feet AGL, you're right, then it goes to 3152 there also. 1,400, look at that. Just on time. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask me.
Can you take a look at a chunk of airspace?
Certainly.
Go to Foxtrot Whiskey Sierra.
The airport?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you want to look
Where Lovely
at,
is.
you want to, yeah, that's a perfect picture right there.
Okay.
So you're looking at Fort Worth Sphinx.
Yes.
And just to the southwest, you see that magenta cutout that looks like a baseball home plate.
Yep.
Okay, now zoom out a bit so you can see all of
Oh.
Bravo airspace around. You want to zoom out. There you go.
Yep.
So you can see all of Bravo airspace.
Yep.
And you'll notice we have a magenta cookie cutout that surrounds all of Bravo airspace, including that little baseball home plate. So why is it there? What purpose does it serve?
So it's dark to light to the outside. So it's 700 feet. So the Class G starts at 700 feet on the outside. It goes to 1,200 feet in the middle there. Why? I don't know.
Good catch.
But the way I see this here is there's 1,200 feet AGL in the middle of the home plate there.
You're correct. Thank you.
No problem.
That's a good
I
catch.
passed.
That's a favorite. That's a favorite examiner question on a private jet.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Yeah, there's stuff like this all over the place. Now that everybody's got ForeFlight, my students are going to me all the time trying to play Stump the Dummy and go, "Hey, Fred, what's this?" Any other questions?
Hi, so
So the
Steve.
next, go ahead,
Are you-
Steve.
Oh, hi. Hey, I tried to put this in chat, but I was in Class C airspace in the Sacramento area going to McClellan, which is underneath
Yep.
the ship. And the controller actually cleared me back to VFR and told me to switch over to the CTAF, but I was still in Class C airspace when he did that. And I'm curious if you have to go in talking to them, but are they able to give you permission to stop like that on the way out?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, and is it every one of them? Probably not. But in that situation there, where you're trying to go to an uncontrolled airport, but you got to talk to the Class C airspace to get there, they probably have most ATC stuff has most TCA will have a letter of agreement for different situations that might happen. That probably is exactly what goes on there. They have a letter of agreement that they're authorized to give people permission to go to the CTAF, even though they're still in the Class C airspace. If there was somebody in the Class C airspace where they felt there might be a conflict, then they would keep you on frequency. But if there's nobody between you and the airport, they'll probably let you go to the CTAF.
Thank you for the help.
No problem. Tom just asked if we're going to get wings credit for this. As soon as my computer guru sends me the list of everybody who attended the class today, I will get onto the FAAsafety.gov website and put everybody's emails in there, and you'll all get credit for this course as far as the wing stuff is concerned. Any other questions?
I got another stump type question if you're interested.
All right, go ahead.
All right, type in, I think it is, let me get the airport symbol for you. That one. Can't remember what it is. Bravo Hotel Bravo. And you want to zoom in tight. That's good, right there. Does this airport have lights?
Yes, because it's got a star L next to it down there by the altitude.
And what's that mean?
Star L means check the supplement, meaning that you have to go to the chart supplement book into the services section to look at the section on lights. It may 99 times out of 100 now, it means it's pilot control lighting. And if it's star L on the instrument chart, on the en route chart, it's definitely pilot control lighting. But this one, like way back last century, if you saw this on a sectional chart, you might have to go to the airport facilities directory back then. And what you'd find in the section would be a phone number. You'd have to call the phone number and tell whoever answered the phone to turn the runway lights on before they went home and to work at night, because you were going to come in after dark and the runway lights would just stay on all night long. But most of the time now, the star L means there's probably pilot control lighting at this airport.
So does that mean we can bring up the lights on 123.0?
You also have to check the supplement book for that, because I flew into Ames, Iowa one night and put in the CTAF into the radio and clicked the mic 7 times and nothing happened. This is the reason why I became a 4-flight person. The person I was flying with had 4-flight, and I'm going, I don't need that. I'm a pilot. I'm a real pilot. I don't need all electronic stuff. But the lights wouldn't come on. So I said, you got the airport facility director on that thing? He tapped the thing and it came up, and I said, read what it says about the lights. And it was a different frequency. Matter of fact, it was the approach, it was the clearance delivery frequency for a nearby airport for whatever reason. And so he had to go to that frequency and click the mic, and the lights finally came on.
Same thing here.
Yep.
The point being is that pilots are not in the habit of associating the chart supplement with the sectional in their flight planning like they should.
That's true. That's true.
You said Ames, Iowa is the same thing, different frequency.
It was. This was about 8 years ago. It's now switched back. Now Ames, Iowa is back on the CTAF.
I only know of one other place that has that. I'm sure there's others, but one other is Aeroflex, 1-2 November.
Gerald Brown asked about 48 Yankee. That's one of those. That's a fun one. The Minnesota Canadian border splits the runway right down the middle, so you got to read very carefully in the chart supplement book about that one, because depending on which way you're coming from, you may have to talk to there's special rules. You can fly into Canada to come in and land. International Falls is the same way. If you're trying to run into land on the north-south runway, or the one that's mostly north-south, you got to go into Canada to line up with the runway. Any other questions?
So does that mean you have to clear customs at both ends?
I think it depends on where you're coming from. If you're coming from Canada and landing at Piney Creek, you probably don't need to clear customs as long as you're just leaving and going back the same way you came. If you're landing at Piney Creek and continuing on into Minnesota, yeah, I think you need to clear customs.
What if we intend to land at Piney Creek, runway 33, and taxi back to the ramp, which is on the U.S. side? I mean, we're crossing the border twice now. Do we have to check in with the Canadians?
Info, where is it?
See how the ramp, most of the ramp is in the U.S.
Yep.
So if we land on 33 and use most of the runway and back taxi, we're in and out of Canada. Does that mean we have to check in?
I think that's why there's 2 chunks of the ramp there. North parking ramp is in Canada. The south parking ramp is in the United States. So if you're coming from Canada, you go to the Canada ramp. If you're coming from the United States, you go to the United States ramp, unless you're coming from Canada and continuing on. Then I think you need to go to the United States ramp, because that's where customs is.
I get that, but if we land on 3-3 and cross the border while we're rolling out and then back taxi to the US ramp, do we need to do something because we crossed that border twice?
I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose the
Stuff
same,
like this.
same question would apply if we were landing on 1-5 and back taxiing, I
Yep,
guess,
exactly.
to the Canadian ramp.
Bob, don't you need to ask Customs and Border Patrol that question?
Probably. That's why there's a phone number there.
I would prefer not to because I would end up with 10 pages of paperwork to fill out or something. I'd have to buy a
Just go to-
sticker for both countries.
Yeah, or just go to Roseau.
I think you have to fill out that EFS if you go into Canada, in any way, whether you walk across or fly across or any other way, don't you?
I think Penny. Yeah, that's what I said. You'd have to dig into that a little bit deeper because I think Penny Creek is the exception to that. Since it's right on the border like that, there's an exception to having to fill out all that, and all that paperwork is just to come back. That's from the United States side. If you're going into Canada, it's not nearly as much paperwork as it is coming home. Any other questions? So the next month on the second Saturday of August, which is, let me look at my calendar, the 13th, we will have another safety seminar. I believe that one's going to be on, hang on a second. Stop sharing here. Here it is. The one next month is on maintenance inspections required for aircraft and the regulations that pertain to them. This is the Aero stuff and the Aviate stuff, but the reason we have to use those acronyms to remember all that is because the regulations for each one of those is far afield. They're not only one spot in the regulation. So on the 13th of August, we're going to talk about Aviate and Aero and all the stuff that pertains to the maintenance inspections of the airplane and what regulations are the regulations that make us look at all that stuff to make sure that all those inspections are complete. That'll be at 1 o'clock on the 13th. Then after that, the chief of maintenance here, Paul Block, will tell me sometime this month what he's going to be talking about in September.